On this week's episode, we're going to discuss Linux has a new virus removal tool.
Oh, that
but do we need it?
You shouldn't have paused there, Michael.
I mean, it was fun to add it there because people for like a second, people were like, "Wait, what?" Nah, just a removal tool. We'll talk about that later in the show. Welcome to Destination Linux, your favorite video podcast. My name is Michael.
I'm Ryan.
And I'm Jill.
We're also going to be covering an ARM-based laptop that's made for Linux. I can't wait for this. It's going to be a very fun topic. Plus, we also got some Linux gaming, software spotlight, and so much more. Now let's get this show on the road toward Destination Linux.
Our feedback this week comes from Scott. Scott has this to say. Latest show released on 4/23/2024. You know, I appreciate when they put the actual date of the show because sometimes they reference a show and we've done so many. I have no idea which one they're talking about.
And also, we might not get it for a while. You know, like it might get into the queue. It might be, a month, as in this case, it's been a couple months since we actually talked about this. So this is a very useful thing. So in the future, if you'd like to help us know when we talked about something, feel free to put the date or an actual like link to the episode that you are referring to. That'd be cool too, because then we can skip all extra effort on our part.
Yeah, we can be extra lazy thanks to you. Thank you, Scott, for doing that. Talking about new Pi 5 Pro. I remember that episode.
Great Scott did that.
Oh, gee.
Aww.
There's another interesting sock by Raxa, and I know I'm butchering that. I have no idea how it's supposed to be said. It's RADXA.
Radxa. Whatever.
You nailed it. And they have the NIO or NIO 12OL and the RADXA 12L. Both look awesome with lots of features like an Intel processor on a SoC, which is pretty cool. And AI integration. And you've got to have AI integration in everything nowadays. Just ask any tech company, period. Wherever they can, they're throwing the AI stuff in there. But it's cool to have a
even if it doesn't make any sense at all. Yes, let's add AI for sure.
Absolutely. So I took a look at both of these. Really cool stuff. I was not familiar with Raxa. When I was talking to Jill before the show, Jill, you mentioned you had covered some of their products before, which makes me feel a little more comfortable kind of talking about them because there's a lot of companies out there from different Chinese manufacturers and stuff that produce socks, but not all of them are necessarily the quality on par or they've been around long enough to be kind of tried and true and tested, but sounds like this company's been around for a while, Jill.
Yeah, they have. I even follow them on Twitter, and I've had conversations with them in the past.
Very nice.
Oh, that's rad.
Or on X.
Jill has conversations with them randomly. Like, who?
Of course you did, Jill.
It's unbelievable, Jill. You are unbelievable. Like, do you just know every single person? She feels comfortable talking to anyone, anytime, and just reaches out there. They also had a really cool product besides the two mentioned in there, which was a micro server. Now, this would be a lot of fun because it's a little tiny mini micro server and it runs some really powerful applications for a micro server because it uses the Ryzen processors with Vega graphics. So this would be a really fun thing, I think, to get your hands on to if you want servers, but you don't want to take up all that space. Or in my case, where I got one of the giant blade servers and my wife really hated the sound of this thing constantly humming.
The noise, yeah.
And by the way, when it turned on, it sounded like a turbine jet engine taking off. It's like it's about to explode when you first turn those things on.
Yeah. There was also a point when Ryan, it's also for those who don't know, Ryan is giving me some deals on some hardware and even just giving me some hardware occasionally. And he said, "Hey, you want to buy a server?" Nope. No, I do not.
I don't want to loud.
I know exactly how loud those are. I do not need that.
Oh, Michael and Ryan, I have a rack full about 10 of those that I used to use for rendering. And
of course you do, Jill.
I actually had to, of course, take it outside of the house to run it. It was in the garage, and even then it was so loud it drove Steven up the wall.
Yeah, they could be obnoxious. And that's why this would be a good deal to take something like this. If you're just doing little minor server applications, home server stuff, this would be a lot of fun to play with. Sticking to the 12L, though, it's a quad-core ARM Cortex. A78 with a 2.2 to 2.4 gigahertz and the quad-core ARM Cortex, because you got the big little architecture there. You got the Mali GPU, dual processor unit, which is their AI accelerator that's built in. They've got all of the encoding for all the different graphics, 4K at 90 frames per second, even, which is pretty impressive for a little sock. And it starts about $99. So it's a really good deal. It's got the GPIO pins as well. My only thing with this is the same thing I'm going to say about any of these types of boards is Raspberry Pi is not great just because they kind of mainstreamed the sock and showed people why it's important. They are great because they're a member of the community, in the educational community, in a huge way. So yes, there are companies, lots of them, that can release a board that's more powerful than the Raspberry Pi. But because of the Raspberry Pi Foundation and all the work they do with educational institutions, getting these in hands of kids, and all of the companies they work with to create sets and kits and everything else to work with the Raspberry Pi, that's what makes them irreplaceable in my book. So yes, there are more powerful options out there, but if you gave me a more powerful sock and a Raspberry Pi beside each other, I'm going to choose the Raspberry Pi every time because of the instruction sets and all that's going to be probably written for them. All the kits are going to be compatible with them. And I know what they do as a foundation for education out there. And to me, that's more valuable than having a slightly more powerful thing. So my suggestion to all these companies that want to compete with Raspberry Pi is consider what you're giving back to the community, not just what you're sticking on top of the board, which is cool.
That's a good idea.
But, that's my thought.
I think that's a really good point because it's not necessarily good enough to just do a hardware level competition, because not even just because, in your point of like the extra stuff they do with the foundation and the educational aspects, all of that is good, but there is an element of hardware using ARM. In this case, they're not necessarily ARM, but so they have a little bit of a benefit there. But there are other cases that they are selling ARM products as well. So if it's an ARM-based product, the support and compatibility factor is a drastically problematic thing for non-Raspberry Pi compatible things. So if you have a much more powerful device, you don't have compatibility with Raspberry Pi based stuff, then you don't get the benefit of the momentum and the inertia that Raspberry Pi 5 would get versus the other ones. Like that, you basically don't have to do a lot more to just transition from one version of the Pi to another version of the Pi. But to go from one Pi to a Pi from something else, it's a lot. In some cases, you would lose support for something entirely. So that's one of the reasons I don't really like the ARM architecture in general, because of that just nonsense of compatibility issues. But it's proof that the Raspberry Pi 5 is not just popular because it's Raspberry Pi. It's because they are putting so much effort into the inertia and momentum of the product to get people to want to do it. And unless you're doing that too, you're going to pretty much miss a very large portion of the market.
Plus, they put the Raspberry Pi in Targets and Best Buys and Micro Centers.
That's true too. Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
Also, just real quick for those who we talked earlier about having AI a part of everything, the Raspberry Pi they recently announced that they have a new Pi add-on for AI. It's like an AI kit, and it's $70, and then you put it with your Pi, and you now have some like local neural network stuff.
Yeah. So you may say, "Hey, you guys sound like you're really biased towards Raspberry Pi," and you'd be correct. I am 100%, and it's because of what they've done for the community.
Yeah.
And that's where I would say, if these other companies want my attention, which you should,
you sound really biased.
Good attention.
And you're correct.
And you are correct. Then do stuff with the community. Don't just make hardware and throw it out there. That's my take. But to Scott sending this to us, don't get me wrong. I'm a hardware geek. I love seeing stuff like this. I still think it's cool. And I end up spending so much time on their site. I ended up in their server section finding the microservers. So Scott, thank you so much for sending this over, because I wasn't aware of this company. And I think there's some really cool hardware here to play with for sure. So if you want to be like Scott and send us cool little things and gadgets that we can look at that we may not know about, head to destinationlinux.net/comments. Leave your comment there. And then you can also reference the episode number if you're talking about a previous episode and be almost as cool as Scott. Almost. It's hard. Scott's kind of rose the bar there.
Right. Yeah. You initiated the whole process of doing that, which is kind of funny. We didn't think about actually asking people to tell us what number the show was.
Yeah, that makes sense. And boy, Scott, next time you write in, put a timestamp. Even better.
Jill's adding extra work.
No, we're going to give our commenters so much work by the time they're done. They're not going to want to write the comment. They're like, I would write a comment, but my God, I had to put, and also make sure you include references if you make any point. Links to those references in APA style.
And if you want us to take you credible, we need to have your LinkedIn URL page. So,
Scott, you're brilliant. Thank you so much.
This episode of Destination Linux is sponsored by LINBIT. LINBIT has been keeping digital businesses running for over 20 years. They're the makers of open source products like DRBD, which is high availability software that has been part of the Linux kernel since 2010, and LINSTOR, industry-leading open source software-defined storage. LINBIT has an active presence in the open source community, and they collaborate with the community to help identify and build new features. LINBIT provides enterprise-grade software that runs on a variety of platforms and OSs without vendor lock-in. What that means is that you could use the software on any platform, including specific hardware that you want to use, or just off-the-shelf hardware that you get and connect it. All of this stuff can be interchanged really easily. And with DRBD and LINSTOR, you can have high-speed replicated block storage in almost any configuration, whether it's Kubernetes, Apache Cloud, or OpenNebula. There's even DRBD proxy for long-distance replication. LINBIT is run by its founders to this day, and all of its engineers and developers are in-house with offices in Europe and North America, which allows them to have global 24/7 support to complement their enterprise offerings. Visit linbit.com to learn more about the people behind LINBIT and the awesome software for block storage, duplication, and more. So, as Linux continues to gain in popularity, thanks to things like Windows 11 recall and other incredibly stupid features, it will also become more tempting target for hackers. Now, Linux is very different from Windows, where you can just look at Windows wrong and it gets infected. Linux is a little bit more sophisticated than that, but it's still obviously possible for any kind of code to become attacked. And the more and more users, the more and more attempts that will happen. Thankfully, though, Linux users tend to be more knowledgeable on computers, and Linux is more secure by default, like I just mentioned. Because, for those who don't know, there's a privilege system that makes it that way versus like the user/root system versus the everyone's admin on Windows. Terrible concept.
There's a lot of reasons why Linux is secure, but that's one of to your point.
Good one.
Yeah.
Yes. And also, they put in stuff on purpose, like recall, that takes your steals all your passwords and what. Anyway,
recall is so dumb.
And embeds ads.
Did you notice
it's gotten worse?
This is true now. After we covered the fact of being a hacker's dream, every tweet I see now is people talking about it being a hacker's dream, which I appreciate. But we came up with that. I mean, we
exactly.
That was up. Yeah,
it's us.
Nobody else would have thought of
There's
that.
no possibility that anyone else could have the same thought. Agree. Yes.
Because you're not biased. So
of course not. I'm not biased. And it's not like there's actually literally a term referring to people having the same thought at the same time, which is parallel thinking. That doesn't exist. They got it from us.
We should start copywriting everything we say on this show so we can make mad money being one of those trashy lawsuit companies that just sue everybody for stuff that they don't really own.
Yeah, but then we technically do have copyright, but the trademark is different. So if we trademarked everything, we would legally be required to defend it every single time. So maybe that's a little too much.
All right, never mind. I guess they can still keep stealing our ideas on Twitter.
Right. No, on X. They can do it on X.
Zitter.
Yeah.
So, while technically, yes, Linux is definitely more secure. It's not even questionable for that. It doesn't mean it's invulnerable. So, there's possibilities for various kinds of things to happen. I mean, it's not like there's never been a virus for Linux ever, but they are incredibly rare. But for a while now, you could install virus scanning software on Linux, such as ClamAV, for example. But now we have a new virus removal tool for Linux. And this is Kaspersky based. So Kaspersky has entered the game. And this is, for those who don't know, It's a very popular antivirus software, mostly for Windows, of course, and is a Russian multinational cybersecurity antivirus private provider headquartered in Moscow, Russia, and operated by a holding company in the United Kingdom. And if you're wondering if that was from Wikipedia, yes.
Yeah, of course. So the reason why I wanted to include that part too is important is because Kaspersky is not without its controversy. There's a lot of controversy around Kaspersky. But I want to talk about a couple things with Kaspersky. First of all, I appreciate the fact that they created a virus removal tool for Linux. So let me just put that right out there because I like any company contributing anything to Linux. And if it's open source, which I don't think it is, that would be even better because it would make it far more trustworthy of a tool in there.
It is highly unlikely to be.
But the thing I wanted to mention is Kaspersky is, because of its ties with Russia, is often accused of potentially being a Russian agent, I guess, in some form, and that they, because of the way an antivirus works, the ones that are monitoring, not one is just a removal tool, is, it needs access to everything in your system. And with that access to everything in your system, think like Michael going on his rant about how ridiculous it was for the, Rocket League or whatever, to have that anti-cheat program that runs at the kernel level.
Rocket League does not have that problem.
Yeah.
League of Legends.
League of Legends. LOL.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So League of Legends, that's
dare
why
you insult the League of Rockets. Oh my goodness.
Michael's childish
Rocket
game
cards.
that he plays is not impacted by what I'm saying here.
Not impacted.
Yeah. No, but what's interesting about this is that while a lot of claims have been made, and Kaspersky cannot run, for instance, a lot of U.S. government and things have banned it from being utilized. They're also a company that's oftentimes publishing vulnerabilities that they found. They're one of the first antiviruses in many cases to identify and be able to remove a lot of these powerful viruses. I can see the conspiracy heads spitting right now going, that's because they created them. I can't argue all of that. I'm just telling you guys, I'm laying out the foundation of people's opinions, and you're going to have to make of it what you will, because I will tell you, Kaspersky makes a really good antivirus program. One of the best. And there are companies out there that test these antiviruses constantly for their effectiveness every single year. And Kaspersky is always in the top. So
maybe not the top number one and on every category, but it is always in the top 10. And most of the time it's in the top 3 on every category. Typically.
They're very good at what they do. So I'm very happy they're contributing and thinking of Linux. I think it's cool to have another option if you were to get infected. But I also think that it's important we start considering the fact that despite Linux being a more secure platform by default, I think because of its popularity increase, this virus problem that has been mostly a Windows thing is going to become more and more of a problem that we're going to have to contend with. Especially because the honeypots in Linux are so much bigger. If you think about it, the entire cloud, all of the servers, all of this stuff runs on Linux. So, if you're going after Windows, you can get some companies, and a lot of times you're getting companies from their desktop employee standpoint. But if you go after servers, you can get a lot more data and a lot more valuable information. And you've got a lot more governments attacking each other with cybersecurity threats and things, which means Linux is going to be a target, and they're going to create very advanced things with Linux. So like Michael said, it's not invulnerable. So I'm really happy to see that Linux is getting attention from companies like Kaspersky. But we also have alternatives out there already if you're not comfortable with them. And I understand why, like Clam. As an alternative AV antivirus software and things. Now, remember, this is not an antivirus suite that you would run on your system and keep. This is just a removal tool. So, but it's the starting stages.
Yeah. And it's cool to have something like that. And I do think it's valuable to a degree. I think it's also important to note that the vast majority of users currently do not have to care about an antivirus on Linux, which that's true at this moment. So when people ask the question, do you need an antivirus on Linux? The answer to that is no, you don't necessarily need one. But there is a possibility that you might, if, for example, you have someone using the system and just randomly installing things and clicking on stuff and they don't have any effort of care to make sure that they're not clicking on stuff that is malicious. Now, I've personally have experience in a couple of things that is kind of funny. So I have people I know, friends who worked at antivirus companies. One of them being Kaspersky, in fact. And
You're a Russian spy.
I said I know them. I didn't say it was me.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, my bad.
So I also know other people who also are friends who are on the exact opposite, who do not care what they click and will click stuff regardless of what if it's malicious or not. And like go on forums and just randomly click things. And I've even had conversations where someone said, hey, could you help me fix my computer? And I said, okay, so here's my rule. You clearly have done something ridiculous, which is probably like clicking on something you don't know what it is. And they said, yep. Okay, so here's my rule. I will fix your computer that is Windows one time. If you do it again, I will never help you again unless you agree to switch to Linux.
I like that. That's good.
Yeah.
And they did, again, click the malicious nonsense. And then they said, hey, could you fix it? And I said, well, you know the rule. Sure, just put Linux on it. I don't care. They have never asked me again to fix their machine.
Yes. No, that's
but they are almost guaranteed clicking on random stuff. Like I don't think their behavior has changed.
But Linux helps them.
But Linux is stopping them from hurting themselves, because when they download these malicious nonsense, they're not going to like give them permissions to execute in Linux. They're not going to like activate the stuff, because if they just download something that's like an image that pulls in other stuff with it, it's just not going to.
I respect your friend, because you know, we tell people all the time, don't click links in your email, all this type of stuff. But if you're going to do it, go full stupid. Just click everything and have fun and live life on the edge.
See what's going to happen with
one or the other. Yeah, one or the other.
Well, speaking of which, I used to use ClamAV all the time to scan Windows machines. You know, boot in a Linux distro, use ClamAV and go through it without loading Windows and dealing with the slow load because of all the viruses and spyware installed. And it does a good job.
Yeah. Another great tool of Linux is to fix Windows. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But is that like what you said is interesting, because I think it, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure ClamAV only focuses on Windows issues. So like it only scans for Windows viruses. So it's technically a Linux tool, but it's not trying to find viruses on Linux, right?
Yeah, it can though.
Okay.
When was the last time I ran it? It's been a while, but I think it runs the Linux system as well.
Okay.
Yeah, because it would go through the root directory and everything. Yeah.
Okay, cool. It's been a very long time since I used it.
Yeah.
As you can probably tell.
I had it running one time on a server, so that was very, very helpful.
So Kaspersky, thank you for doing this. And please consider making stuff open source. I think it would go a long way in the community. I don't know if the reputation is deserved or not that Kaspersky has. But one way that you could definitely start putting people's minds at ease is through open source. I think that would be a powerful way to be like, hey, all of our cards are on the table. You know, we're not some Russian spying agency. We're here to stop software. We've done a lot of great work in history. And now that it's open source, you can see for yourself.
And that would be a really good way to, you know, get good reputation from it and try to battle the stigma that it has. But it is also a really good tool for Windows. They have proven themselves many times to remove the viruses that they find and all that. But I did think of something as we were talking about this, that, you know, people talk about the conspiracy and that, you know, oh, they write the viruses, that's why they can fix it or whatever. And it's kind of funny to me, because if you think about it, the best kind of Trojan horse to make is something that is useful. So if someone installs something because they know it will work, and then they also bring other stuff, there could be, I'm not saying that this is in any way fact. I have no idea. But there is a potential that could be another form of it.
Well, here's an interesting thing. There are viruses out there that will clean your machine from other viruses because it wants to be the only one and not be detected.
Yes, exactly.
And so, like, you know, there's things like that do exist. Now, the biggest story I know of Kaspersky, where all of this started, is from basically a situation happened with NSA staffers in which the Russian government or Russian intelligence, the Kaspersky software was on the NSA machines, and the Russian intelligence and the NSA agent was taking this data home, which they shouldn't have. And somehow the Kaspersky virus or antivirus software alerted Russian agents, or they found out that this particular NSA agent was bringing home these classified files on their machine that had Kaspersky on it. And they targeted this NSA staffer because they wanted the secrets and were able to copy the information. Now, what they never clarified was whether the Russian intelligence got access to Kaspersky's data to find out this NSA agent had these files on there, or it was some other thing. But essentially, that's where the biggest controversy started, where it got removed from all the government's machines in the US government, and I think other governments as well. And so there's some suspicion there, but espionage is going on all the time. But just something to be aware of, or a story for you to look up if you're somebody who's concerned about that.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
And I just actually looked up ClamAV because I was remembering I used to use that on Unix. And it turns out, yeah, Michael, so it was available for HP UX and OpenVMS as well, and Solaris. So I remember I had used that many, many years ago. And yeah, it scans everything on Linux or whatever distro you're running. So just wanted to confirm that for sure.
I appreciate that effort that I did not do.
And Jill, you also had another antivirus you recommend as an option.
Yeah, so Komodo Antivirus for Linux is another great option. It's very popular on Windows and did a nice job. And I used to use it in my classroom when I was teaching back in the day with just Windows. And it did a great job. So that's another option for Linux. And you know what? I was remembering there used to be another one that would actually run in real time on Linux called Sophos. It had a real time and on demand, but it's no longer available for Linux. I just recently checked that.
I think that also happened with Avast. I remember Avast.
Yeah, Avast too. You're right.
But I think they did stop too. I don't remember if that's
not
true.
a big market when your computers don't get infected every day.
Exactly.
Viruses.
And that's what they said. There just wasn't a demand for it. I remember with the.
And it's
Sophos.
not because we don't want our computers to be secure. It's just that by default we don't have to worry as much. Sure, there is
change. I think that could change.
It definitely could change, and I do think that the argument of people saying that the more people are on the platform, the more targets are going to happen, that is totally true. But that's more on the sense of finding vulnerabilities than it is getting viruses. Because with Windows, it's been just you could accidentally just get a virus by clicking it. That's not true in Linux. If you can literally download a virus made for Linux. And because you didn't activate it, you didn't give it permissions to run, you didn't double click it to open it, it won't do anything. It doesn't matter. So as long as you are making sure that when you are 100% comfortable with the things that you run on your machine, you should be golden, even if there are more and more viruses. And if as long as there's not a vulnerability found that messes up everything, that could happen.
And if you package your virus as a .deb and you're trying to target Ubuntu, they'll never be able to open it anyways, thanks to Ubuntu's new features, as we found out earlier in the show.
That's called positive thinking, Ryan. Good job. Yeah. Good job.
Well, because Linux has these, escalated privileges and that's a system of checks and balances. For instance, if you get a worm on Linux, it really doesn't go very far because the amount of privilege you need to go up to the next level is so intense and all those bugs have been patched. But all it has to do is find that one that has not.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess ultimately the final thing is here. So it's really good that y'all put the effort into making a virus removal tool for Linux. It's also really good that you are recognizing that you want to provide it in a way that's free. But if you were to do it open source, that would go a long way for us to all look at this company, Kaspersky, in a different light.
Kaspersky. I actually downloaded it and launched it, and the GUI looks very similar to the Windows version. I had used back in the early 2000s. So it's, it's actually, this
Interesting.
tool has been around since the late 90s. I remember using it way back then.
Well,
we finally got Jill's information. Oh crap, she stored it all on a floppy disk.
Yeah. I remember scanning floppy disks with the Kaspersky.
You probably still do, Jill. I mean,
Yeah.
you still have a whole collection of them. So
actually, by the way, there's a short we made a long time ago. I don't know if Jill, if you know this, but we talked about how you store some of your passwords on floppy drives, and it's like the unhackable.
Absolutely.
I made a short that says Jill's surprising unhackable password management system, and it got a pretty good amount of views.
that's a good T-shirt right there. I'm unhackable and a picture of a floppy disk. That would be
like
another
it.
T-shirt.
Yeah,
I'm
I like
unhackable.
that.
Yes.
The problem is that we come up with all these good ideas for
and
the
you never
shirts.
create them.
Well, I don't remember after the show. You should write it down and then tell me,
Let me see here. I'm gonna write it in our I'm unhackable shirt. What was the other good idea I had last week, Jill?
Great question.
Yeah, nobody remembers. Okay. So let's move on to something really interesting,
I do
because you
remember
made
one that was this SecOps to DevOps. That was one.
Yeah.
Special
SecOps
Ops
to DevOps.
Special ops to DevOps.
SecOps. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
that was one. What's the other one? Anyway, we'll figure it out. We'll go back and watch it. Maybe.
Our audience will write in and let us know.
Yeah.
Yes.
Be our memory
We did
for
it
us.
too.
We're that old. You have to be our memory for us. So if you want to get a new Linux laptop, I've got some really good news for you, because if you have looked at the competition between the PC market and Mac, it's not been good for PC. Like, I love PCs, and I've been building them and servicing them and, drooling over them for decades. But Mac has stomped PC into the ground with their latest laptops. It's just a fact. Like, you could say all the things, you can't repair a Mac. Oh, that's true. I'm just talking about pure price to value you get. For some reason, Apple has stomped PC in value for what you get. And that's really hard to even come out of my mouth.
It's crazy because it used to be not only just like it used to be a joke. Like, yes, you are getting a Mac because it has certain things that you need, but you're also compromising on power. You're compromising on battery life.
You're going to pay way more than it's worth.
And you're going to pay a ridiculous amount of money. And now we're in a situation where the market has increased their prices for competitiveness of Apple, but not increasing their actual value of the laptops. Sure, some of them are really good, but they don't really win. Like, if they win in power, they lose in battery life. If they win in battery life, they lose in power. And that's
or resolution,
or they have terrible tiny screens. Yes, they could also have really, really, really tiny screens for no reason at all. But it's funny because we're in a situation where these two options have just completely flipped, and now we're it's because of like Apple going to ARM and that sort of thing. And Ryan, you said that there's going to be a potential game changer here. Let us know what is actually happening.
Here's the thing.
Should we be excited for this?
You should be super excited. And you should be excited about the company as well, because it's Tuxedo who's leading this charge. And I'm liking this company more and more. Like, I want to get a hold of a Tuxedo. Tuxedo, I know you're listening. Like, you can send me one. Just saying. Just saying. There's a Tuxedo prototype laptop powered by the Snapdragon X Elite 12-core ARM processor that was at the latest Computex 2024. And man, they were so much launched at Computex.
Yeah.
And I skimmed through it, and I could care less about any of it. This is the most important thing that came out of Computex in my mind, and really happy to see Tuxedo's name wrapped around it as well. So the prototype is built on a premium all aluminum body. All right, we're starting out. That's what I'm talking about. You got to have that all aluminum frame a weight of just 1.36 kilograms. So it's lightweight. You're not carrying around a 4-pound laptop, and an equivalent to a 2.5-pound MacBook. Its 14-inch display features a 2560 by 1600 resolution.
Okay, so we got a 2K. Nice.
So for all the Linux computer manufacturers out there besides Tuxedo, that's 2K. That's the next gen stuff from 10 years ago that we should already be on.
Yeah.
4K, 8K is already out. You're all still on 1920 by 1080. Nobody knows why.
Nobody knows why. But
Nobody.
also, real quick, let's talk about this particular, because we brought it up and it's a very important point. And I talked about it recently on Twill, because there are some new laptops that came out, and one of them was 1080p.
Of course.
And
it was Linux-based company, right?
It was a Linux-based company,
because that's how we,
unfortunately. But I had a couple comments that I want to run by you. As the resident hardware addict on the show, it's actually kind of funny because I said some stuff on the show about hardware, and they were like, you don't know about hardware. And I was like, yeah, that's true, but Ryan does, so let's do this.
All right, bring it.
So one of the comments, so they said that 1080p is better for battery life, and that's why they want it. So that's probably true, but my question is, because it's less powerful hardware. My question is, if you have a higher quality screen that is 2K by default, if you lower it to 1080p, do you still benefit from that setting?
No, but you can have a 2K and 4K panel, right, that you're running like an OLED that is going to require a lot less power than a traditional panel that's 1920 by 1080. But this battery problem somehow isn't a problem for Mac. Somehow Mac runs 2K Retina, has the longest battery life of any laptop I've ever used, period. So explain that to me. So what you're saying is true, but it's because of the inefficiency of all the other components in there on that PC. And it's not an excuse in my mind to basically say, well, I want to go with this really dull resolution because it saves my battery life, when the competitor doesn't have to do that. And by the way, Mac's been on 2K even when they were back in Intel. So somehow they were able to have good battery life then. Not, of course, what they're doing now with
not as much now, but they still had pretty good.
Yeah, and so when Intel released their new Ultra line and things like that, I think you're finally going to see PC capable of potentially, by mimicking the big little architecture, the capability of turning down some of these other components so that your battery isn't being absorbed by them, because your PC is not running at full power with everything all the time, which is really stupid. And that's how PCs have been made for a really long time. Whereas Mac came in and said, hey, there's no reason, if the processor can go to 3 gigahertz, to constantly run it at 3 gigahertz 24/7 when you're just opening Notepad. So this is something that everyone should have thought of and we hadn't. So it's interesting point, but it doesn't solve the problem. 1920 by 1080 saves some battery. Your 1920 by 1080 laptop, its max battery life is still half of what a MacBook can get with the 2K resolution. So
right. There is that point too. But also the quality of the issue of 1080p now is the quality of the hardware is kind of cheaped out on, right? Not necessarily that we're talking, I'm not saying that the laptop I just talked about on Twill is that problem, but the typical reason that they do it is because it is the baseline now, so that they're able to, any company that ships a 1080p is able to save a lot of money because it is baseline. It's like why we had 1366 by 768 for years, and everybody was like, well, it's totally fine. Well, if it's totally fine, why do we not still have them?
Well, Cubicle Nate is a perfect example of somebody, if you check our forums, who was always against us when we would talk, me specifically, when I talk about being anti-1920 by 1080. And on the forums, he apologized to me because he started having all kinds of issues connecting to the various terminals and other things when he had 2 or more open based on the 1920 by 1080, and saying, hey, you were right the whole time. This really isn't a good resolution to be using anymore. And so I think most people who do some research will kind of understand that this is not a defendable position anymore. 1920 by 1080 is not a good resolution. If you're getting a fantastic value for a laptop, you're getting a $400 or $500 laptop, by all means. Is it usable? 100%. It's not. What the problem is, these companies releasing stuff for Linux love to cheap out on the screen at 1920 by 1080 and charge the same prices or more as the manufacturers who are putting 2K and 4K screens in there. So that's the problem. It's not, if you're running a 1920 by 1080, good. If you got that computer for a good price, you had it for 10 years, they're perfectly usable. but we're talking about new machines coming out
Great
there
point.
and impressing the market. So
That's
that's
a great point, because especially the fact that it's $1,000 or more and you're still getting 1080p, it's like, we're okay for the Linux companies that are doing that. We are okay, and a lot of people are okay with paying a premium to Linux companies to support Linux, to support that effort. But if we're paying a premium, shouldn't we get premium quality stuff?
Yep.
There's also a difference in architecture. RISC, which is ARM is based off a RISC processor, which is much more efficient. And that's one of the reasons why companies are moving to ARM is because it is more efficient with the battery and the timings and whatnot with the processor and the GPU. Whereas the traditional Intel processor being CISC, it's not as efficient. And so there is more, higher TDP and whatnot. And I know that has a lot to do with what's going on with the
I'm
battery
very
life.
excited going back to the Tuxedo, but I'm also very excited about Intel and their new Ultra line, because it looks like they're all learning some really valuable things. But focusing on Tuxedo here, Snapdragon X Elite 12-core ARM processor, 2560 by 1600 resolution, 400 nit maximum brightness, which is very good, and 100% sRGB coverage, which is super important for people like Michael. For me, all my drawings are crap, so who cares? But for people like Michael and Jill,
No,
that
you
stuff
have
matters.
very good use of abstract white space.
There you go. That's Jill's
You have a
compliment
good
to my
use of
laptop.
negative space.
That's
Thanks,
it. That's
Jill.
what it was.
Negative
That's what it
space.
was.
You get the 32 gigabytes of LPDDR5X memory, and you get storage in the M2 2280 Gen 4 slot there as well, and a 50 watt hour battery and USB 4, HDMI, all of the goodies basically. At the end of the day, it's a prototype, so we don't know what the final version is going to look like, but that prototype sounds like the bomb.com. Yes, I'm old. Yes, I'm old.
I was about to say that phrase is not at all.
I'm talking to the kiddos, Michael. I'm really trying to get the kiddos in on the technology.
Hello there, fellow kids.
So this is huge, because up to this point, we've been hearing about ARM-based processors coming to PC, but it's all been around Windows.
Yeah.
And Tuxedo and Snapdragon partnering up here to bring this to Linux. This is freaking huge. This is huge for us. And I'm so excited to get my hands on this.
Well, when Linux kernel 6.9 was released just this last May, it had better support for ARM processors, including ARM64 Rust code support. And I wanted to read a quote that Linus had to say. And I now have a more powerful ARM64 machine, thanks to Ampere. So the last week, I've been doing almost as many ARM64 builds as I have x86-64. And that should obviously continue during the upcoming merge window too. So Linus has a more powerful ARM64-based machine now to build kernels on. And this goes a long way for Qualcomm. Yes, Qualcomm is upping their support of the latest Snapdragon X Elite in the mainline Linux kernel. So, you're having Linus using these machines, and Qualcomm's like, we better start making our hardware compatible of Linux, especially in the world of, the server world and, Linux.
It could have been Linus, or it could have been me. They heard. It could have been like, oh my God, we need to do this for Ryan.
Exactly.
Actually,
Ryan and Jill and
maybe
Michael.
Yeah.
So maybe it is like indirectly, like maybe Qualcomm is doing it because Linus is using ARM, but maybe Linus is using ARM because he heard us talk about it on this show.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Man, it's one big circle. The circle of life. Right
Circle
there.
of life.
The circle of Linux.
So I'm excited to play with this this new Tuxedo laptop. Even if you want to send us a prototype, we're good with that.
Yeah, I'll totally rock a prototype.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, Michael, to your question about you getting yelled at about the 1920 by 1080, let's say you had a 2K screen or 4K screen. What could I do if I still like 1920 by 1080? Is there any workaround, like software-wise, I could do?
Well, you could lower the resolution down to 1080p if you wanted to.
You could just change your display resolution.
Wow. Huh.
So that doesn't solve the battery like you said, but it does solve for people who have issues of it not being big enough, or for example,
or scaling maybe.
some desktop environments don't have very good fractional scaling.
Yeah.
I'm not going to name them. No, but there are other DEs that do have fractional scaling pretty well, and I wouldn't name those either because that would be just rude or KDE. And
But to mate.
Yes,
sure, but I mean that doesn't help my joke. But yes, but yes, there are some fractional scalings. There's a lot of effort being done into those. And GNOME is a little bit weird because you have to do some extra effort to turn it on. And it's not just a toggle. And that's annoying. Unless you're using Ubuntu, they actually put in effort for that. So that's good. So there are some distros that do put in the effort to make fractional scaling work. So it depends on what you're doing, what configuration you have. But you also can just lower the resolution and just have the 1080p output anyway.
By the way, for those who like 1920 by 1080 and want a good price, there's a Vivo book from Asus that's really good price, uses the Intel Ultra processors in there, and it's 1920 by 1080, but it's on an OLED screen. And let me tell you, it's a beautiful panel, and it's beautiful at 1920 by 1080. So if you put a really high quality screen in there, it's still a way to save money by making it 1920 by 1080 and not 2K. Because that same laptop, by the way, comes with an NVIDIA GPU in it. So it's not like it couldn't run 2K. Not capable of it. But they're doing that for probably efficiency capability. Because OLED's not going to turn on all of the pixels at once, like light up everything like, the other panels traditionally do.
Like IPS do, yeah.
So, I mean, that's what makes it more power efficient.
Does a good job with that.
In there. So that's like, there's some alternatives to if for whatever reason, we're always going to be in Linux stuck on 1920 by 1080, that you could put a better OLED screen in there and still make it pretty nice and have very vibrant, bright coloring.
But also, to be clear, because the reason why we are annoyed by 1080p at this point isn't to do with the resolution itself. It's the fact that majority of the time when a 1080p screen is used, it is used as a way to kind of like pretend to be HD with the full HD classification. And then also, it's usually not a great type of monitor. Like the fact that you can get laptops that have 1080p TN monitors in like these days that are still not ridiculously priced, but still not well priced. And that makes no sense because TN is rarely even done anymore. So like that's the kind of issue that we have. It's not the resolution. It's just like it's a way to seem in a marketing sense that you're having a high quality full HD.
I think it's the resolution too. For me personally, and this is what Nate found, when you're working on multiple things at a time, that 1920 by 1080 is extraordinarily limited compared to the 2K.
Personally, I agree that 1080p is not a great resolution for usage. I mean, I have 4K monitor. So obviously, actually I have two 4K monitors because one was not enough. But I do think that it's not necessarily that the resolution is terrible for everybody. Every use case is different. So if you have
some gamers like 1920 by 1080 because apparently it gives them some advantage in first-person shooters to be zoomed in more or something like that.
Well, there's also the resolution. The refresh rate is more consistent in a lower.
If you have a lower powered machine, maybe too.
But also, but even then, that's not optimal because you'd want to have more screen real estate to see everything. So that has that recommendation. No, what? That recommendation has now become 1440p because it's still not technically a 2K monitor, so it doesn't have the extra stuff. It's like the highest level you can get while still having the same support 1080p has.
1440 from some of these companies.
I would too. I think that if you are going to try to optimize for battery life, but still want to have something that does not count as baseline, 1440 is totally fine.
Or OLED panels.
Yeah, 1920 is also horrible for accessibility software, especially zooming software.
Boom.
Jill
just dropped the bomb on all y'all.
You just
it's shut
horrible.
Your mouth now. You're in the middle of your email about to tell us, oh no, I like 1920 by 1080, y'all stupid. And then Jill said that, and it's like, oh crap, I better delete that. So there you go. Shut it. We win. All right, Jill. Speaking of wanting to play a game in 2K or 4K, what do you got in the gaming software?
So there really isn't enough first-person shooter games with Linux support, namely due to ridiculous rootkit anti-cheat software.
That's true. That's true.
So thankfully, our spotlight this week will help to add another option to check out. And this one is called Containment Zone. Containment Zone is an FPS post-apocalyptic shooter.
You got my attention. I love all that. All that whole
Yay.
line. I love.
You know why it's called that? Because it's called Containment Zone because my skill is so high that you can't beat me. You can only hope to contain me.
I see, Michael.
That makes no sense, but I love it.
So the game on Steam describes itself like this. Containment Zone is a hardcore, realistic tactical shooter in which the player fights his way through escaped mutant experiments, zombies, and military private contractors to uncover the secrets of the Object 1611 laboratory hidden deep within the Soldanasti District Containment Zone.
Sure.
Yeah.
This game's graphics look gorgeous, by the way. Like,
so yeah,
really
the game,
good.
I was amazed because the game was reportedly made by just one very talented high school student. And the graphics are actually AAA quality. They're really, really beautiful. And if you like, the dark and creepy zombie shooting classics like Valve's Left 4 Dead, you will really enjoy this game. I had fun playing it for about a half hour. Just the visual quality alone was excellent.
Yeah. I like these games because I'm practicing for the inevitable zombie apocalypse, and this game helps me practice for such a thing. If this is really created by a single high school student, I don't even know what to say. Like, do you want a job?
Very impressive.
We can't pay you, but you can do software for us and stuff. Like, we couldn't pay you much. Like
Who knows? It may have been one of my students.
That makes sense. That would make sense to me. If it was Jill. But this person, someone needs to hire them real quick if they hadn't already. Because
I wonder if this is like what engine powers this? Maybe like Unreal or something.
Yeah, it looks very Unreal, or possibly Unity, but it looks
Unreal.
It looks more Unreal. Yeah.
It's very cool.
Unreal 4 or 5.
Post-apocalyptic survivor horror shooter, man. What else do you need in life? Nothing. A rocket ship to get off this planet, but that's another episode.
Yeah. Also, it's a single player, so you don't have to worry about rootkits.
Yeah, that's a nice thing. And
nice thing.
It's only $16.99 on Steam, and I've already seen it go on sale before, so grab it. It's really fun.
Definitely. All right. Hey, Jill, take us into the software spotlight.
Okay. Well, speaking of storing passwords on a floppy disk, this is an excellent tool to encrypt your files files on a floppy disk without having to use a separate tool. Usually I use Vim or Vi and then encrypt it and then put it on the floppy.
How do you exit? That's the question. How do you ever leave the screen? All right, WQ. I'll try to remember that.
You got me. I'm sorry.
You've broken Jill.
Our software spotlight is Encrypted Notepad 2, where you could take encrypted notes, right, Jill?
Yes. So sometimes you just need to take back control of your privacy and keep your notes out of metadata crawlers. This offline basic text editor features encryption using AES 256 and stored in the PGP OpenPGP.ASC format. This means it's compatible with any service that also uses the standard, and you can make your own cloud backup solution using any of the cloud storage providers to sync across devices. This is just awesome. And so to install it, this is not a handy flat pack that you can install. This one requires a little work. And for those in our audience who
Michael's like, no, I'll never use it because it requires work.
So,
no thanks.
For those in our audience who are more experienced or intermediate users of Linux will know how to do that. But some of our beginners may not know. So I'm just going to explain it. Mm-hmm. So all you have to do, and it's really not rocket science. You just open your terminal, you type git clone and the URL of the software that you want to download, which for today's example is encrypted notepad2.git. you cd into that newly created directory. So you type cd space encrypted notepad 2. And then on the next line, you say go build. And then the next line you would / encrypted notepad 2, which is what allows you to launch the program. Now, first, you need to make sure that the Go 1.22 plus library is installed. But if you're unsure of what library that is, when you go to build encrypted notepad 2, your terminal will let you know. And will let you know what library to sudo
It
apt
said, hey,
install.
not found. Do sudo snap install go.
Yeah.
Why are you laughing, Michael?
That's it. And now
That is
you
not
have
what happened, people. It is
you have
added for entertainment.
now you have launched encrypted notepad 2. Now this will all be in our show notes. So you can go through them yourself. But that's what I did on one of my machines to
Well, your
install this
instructions were
awesome.
perfect. I now have encrypted notepad 2 installed here, Jill. Thank you.
Yay.
Wait a minute. Do you?
Shut up, Michael. All right, what's the tip of the week? Mike?
But before we get into that, I'm glad you said it's for advanced and intermediate users, because in addition to all the stuff that's going to be in the show notes, you also need to know how to install Git in the first place.
Yes,
to use
there
Git.
you go.
And you also need to, when you have, like, in that list, you still got to make that folder, the encrypted notepad 2 folder. So, like, there's people who are intermediate users and advanced users would be totally fine with this. It's just like, this is the reason why, as a certain person who is a technical person, I still pass, because I don't just make a flat pack, please. Like, if you want people to use it, make a flat pack or a snap or an app image, whatever. Just pick one of the three and then let's go.
Well, what is nice, Michael, about this one is it actually already creates the directory for you.
Okay,
So
that's
that
good.
was convenient.
Yeah. That's good. Still, a flat pack would be nicer if they created that for me.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's go to the tip of the week. And actually, our tip of the week comes from a user with the name Pseudo Veggies, which is a fantastic name.
Yes.
And says that latest episode, Ryan was talking about using.
Keep my name out your mouth, Pseudo Veggies.
Are you gonna slap
Will Smith?
Will Smith.
Pseudo Veggies is so awesome. He's one of my favorite people I talk to in chat and Discord.
Sorry, that came to me. You mentioned my name right up front like that. You know, it got me scared. I'm over here trying to install encrypted notepad, and I hear my name. All right, go ahead, Pseudo Veggie.
So last week or last episode, Ryan was talking about using Microsoft PowerPoint and having a limit on the number of edits that you can, or not redos or undos.
Yes.
That's limit of undos. And that I would suggest Ryan use R and RStudio, available for free and on Linux, which then use the library package called officerR. There's two R's in this. Capital R at the end, because that's
for Ryan, Officer Ryan.
Sure.
Yeah,
cool. Because of the army of the army created of against the companies that don't support Linux and that sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was just reminding people who hadn't seen that episode. Like that's the.
Well, they better
have seen the officer. Exactly. You should go back and watch it. You can use RStudio or even VS Code, which has made improvements on R functionality, to make whatever you need to make be done in R. Then it produces a Windows 365 document or PPT to give to someone on Windows. It is a way to stay in Linux and still have Windows content for work or school. The best thing about R is that just about every learning resource is free and available online, with very supportive groups and YouTube videos. The Big Book of R, for example, is best starting resource that points to many other online books.
Very nice. This is really interesting advice. I like the workaround here for people who don't have the option of even getting on a Windows machine to begin with. And this is a real fear, I think, because when you go to school, back into college, they give you this list of requirements. And it's not like, hey, we'd like you to have this stuff. It's like,
you will fail if you do not do this.
Yeah, you cannot do these classes without this stuff. And so, and Windows is all over it, right? And Microsoft Office specifically is all over it. So it's very interesting when people find workarounds like this, if you don't have that option to even use 365 online, which is limited. I don't know if people know that, but if you use the online version of Office, there's a lot of limitations in that software compared to the desktop versions. So that's an issue, but this RStudio thing seems really interesting to try out. Unfortunately, I went to go download this for my Ubuntu installation, and I use Zorin, still using Zorin, and I could not get it to.
Then you should rephrase that and say my Zorin installation.
Well,
because yes, it's Ubuntu based,
yeah.
but the amount of comments that we would get if we said Ubuntu.
I did rephrase it. I just said Zorin.
I'm just
Ubuntu,
making it clear. I'm just making
Yeah.
it clear.
And it wasn't available, RStudio, in the software repository, so I downloaded it, and it's a .deb file, which is fine. Like I've done this a million times in Ubuntu-based distros. I just open it, and it'll even open the deb file in the software store and install it for me, but it won't. And we talked about that on a prior show, not shocking, but it's super easy. Just install gdebi, even though it doesn't tell you to do that. It just literally, when I double click the .deb file for RStudio, it just opens the software center. So I went and installed gdebi in the terminal, and it still won't run it and undo it. And then it gives me a command not found and tells me to use like a gdebi -clone or something.
Core, that's what it was.
Core, yeah. And I installed that, and it still won't run it. So are .debs dead in Ubuntu base? Question mark?
Oh no.
Or do I just need to reset?
Yeah, Brian, did you reboot that machine?
I didn't reboot yet.
Because I kind of remember vaguely, because I use gdebi on all my Debian-based distros, and I kind of remember running into an issue like that, and I did have to reboot for gdebi to work, because it also works with root.
This is super lame. Like we're having to deal with
it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny because, well, there was this big kerfuffle with the latest release of Ubuntu when people were trying to install debs, and it wouldn't work because of this exact problem of not having gdebi and it not working in the App Center. When the previous version did work with like the GNOME software store. And it's interesting because the gdebi was like the standard profile that you would use in order to install it. And then when GNOME software implemented this feature, they stopped pushing gdebi in the system. And now that it's kind of feel like they just forgot this piece. Now, this could be true for Ubuntu. It could be true for Zorin. I'm not sure exactly why this happened. But gdebi is supposed to be the solution for the store not having support. And if it's not working, I think Jill is probably right that the reboot might be necessary because you have to give the thing a full sudo access. But it also has been so long since I've needed to use gdebi. I don't remember. And it's funny because most of the time, even when I did use it, it was by default built into the system. So it's kind of like one of those things where you've been using Linux so long, you can't help on the answer because you haven't dealt with it in a decade
long time
or something.
Whereas I use it literally almost on a daily basis. In fact, I just used it yesterday to update Discord. That's what I use to update Discord on my machines is gdebi. So, and I do it in the command line.
So I'm a different type of user than Jill is apparently, because if it's a deb, I'm actually kind of disappointed. If it's an RPM, I'm a little less disappointed, but still disappointed because I want a Flatpak or Flatpak or a Snap. My first go-to would be a Flatpak. That would be my preference. If I had to get something else, a Snap would be better. And then if I have the absolute last resort is an app image for me. And then if I can't get any of those, then I do deal with having the RPM or deb. But I would prefer a more universal approach because it just makes more sense. Also, this is a side topic, but the way a deb is created, not the most optimal. Just saying. Yeah, y'all should work on that.
Well, a couple side notes here. I just want to add in real quick. Encrypted Notepad we were talking about earlier. Jill, your instructions were perfect. It is running, Michael, on my machine, and the reason why I want to mention this is, God, I'm good at using Linux.
Good job. You are such a super technical
and following
person.
Jill's instructions there. But the most important part is when you open it, it has pretext before you start typing, and it says, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. That's what it's. I love
Yes,
that.
isn't that
That's so
awesome?
good.
That's true.
I
like
love it.
I
Encrypted
like it.
Notepad. That made me really happy there. The other thing is in my college courses, which I'm going for cybersecurity, Linux has come up into one of the classes. And so they're teaching people how to like navigate Linux. And so you boot up 3 servers in this lab, Windows 10, Windows 11, an OpenSUSE, and an Ubuntu. And when you boot up in Ubuntu or we boot up in Windows, it says, hey, go to, oh crap, I did so little about Windows, I forget. Go to about like software info in the GUI and then system info. And then you can get your actual information about what release of Windows you're in. And for Linux, instead of just in the Ubuntu one, instead of just going and saying, hey, and in Linux, type in Ubuntu, type in about and get your information on the distro and system information and stuff. It wants you to go through the terminal and do LSB, release A, all of that type of stuff. And I thought they're giving people the wrong opinion, I feel like, on Linux again, when you don't have to use the terminal. By making it out like Linux, you have to use the terminal to do something basic like get information. Not every distro has that, but it's a bunch.
I mean, almost all of them do now because it's unless you're getting a niche like boutique style distribution. Because if they're using any of the main DEs, they all have some kind of built-in info center sort of thing.
Right. About
something like that. About or like KDE has a K info center, and XFC has a thing that tells you, and Monte has a thing that tells you. So I would be shocked if majority of distros didn't have that just built in by the DE. But it's funny that you mention it because I would think that a cybersecurity course would need to have to be as up to date as possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time, colleges and universities are not in any way up to date and by years.
Yeah.
So maybe they don't even know that is a possibility at this point.
Yeah. I guess in fairness, it was one of the latest releases of Ubuntu and OpenSUSE. And in Windows, while you did the GUI one, they also taught you WinVer from the command line to give you the Windows version and stuff like that. But with Linux, it was just the terminal. And I hated that because I know it's a small thing, but because I don't want people, their first experience in college touching Linux, that you have to type in this weird,
in the terminal.
Weird command that makes no sense. Like WinVer makes sense, but the LSB crap does not make sense. It's just something you learn. And that's why it annoyed me. Anyways, now that we're done with these tangents.
I mean, it does make sense if you go through the process of what those letters
LSP
stand
release.
for.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, LSP release, yes. So it does, and there's also uname, there's other options to do it. And it to be fair, you're not wrong. It is still an excessive amount of stuff to do when you could just click on an about window.
Or show both. It would have been okay to do both, but don't make Linux like that's your only
For
option.
a cybersecurity person, you should be teaching them everything about the system.
Taught me both in Windows, of course, but not in Linux. Make me mad. I'm gonna write them a letter. Don't you worry. I'm gonna write the dean a letter and say, I know Jill. You better fix this.
And Jill probably knows you, so you better not make her mad.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to see Jill mad. Y'all think she's all nice. You just wait. When she loses it, it's going to be big time because she's never lost it in her whole life. But the moment she does one time, she's going to let out all of those years of anger at once. So
that's one possibility. Also, another possibility, doesn't physically have any anger in herself. That's another one.
It's just happiness.
It's just not possible for her to have that that emotion. You ever seen, that movie Inside Out?
Yeah.
Well,
I love that movie.
There's a new one coming out, Inside Out 2, in just a week or so, maybe 2 weeks, I don't know, so really soon. And that actually, when I was talking about Jill's emotion, they have that's what the movie's about, is a person has emotions and you're watching it from the perspective of the emotions. I just don't think the one for the anger one didn't show up for Jill. I just don't think it's there.
Part of her brain never turned on. The anger part. Yeah, it's just a rainbow there. Just a little rainbow.
Or she has 2 joys. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Aww.
All right. Well, a big thank you to each and every one of you for supporting us by watching or listening to Destination Linux. However you do it, we love your faces. You need to come join us in our Discord, where we can't see your face, but we can talk to you there in Discord. We could technically
You could.
see
There
your
is
face
video
if you
chat.
stream.
There is that. Sure.
But go to tuxdigital.com/Discord. Come hang out with us. There's all kinds of topics going on right now. If you want to talk about something going on in the show, did Michael make you mad in this episode? I'm sure he did when he was talking about 1920 by 1080. I defended it. I think it's great.
That's
for
not
all of
what
you.
you did. That's
So
not
if
what you did.
are on Team Ryan, go to our Discord forum and let me know the support you have.
For Michael, exactly. Let us know the support you have for me. So you can do that, and you also can have like lots of great conversations in the Discord server. We're there all the time. So go to tuxdigital.com/Discord, and also we have there our patron only section. So you could go to tuxdigital.com/membership and become a patron when you get a ton of cool perks. You get the access to watch the show be recorded live and see all the extra shenanigans that happens every week. If you think that we have some shenanigans here on the show, imagine what it would be like on the unedited version.
We're super stupid when we're not edited.
Exactly. So come check that out, tuxdigital.com/membership. And also at the end of each show, we have the patron only post show that happens every week right after we're done recording. So
Tux Digital right now.
You should. For some reason, tuxdigital.com/membership to sign up. And if you want to support the show in other ways, we have our merch store, which we have new ideas from this particular episode. So we're going to be hopefully remembering those. tuxdigital.com/store. So click on all the t-shirts and hoodies and mugs and even so much more that we have there to see all the great stuff, especially the new Destination Linux Retro Vibes collection. tuxdigital.com/store.
Sure to check out all the amazing shows here on Tux Digital. That's right, we have an entire network of shows to fill your whole awesome week with geeky goodness. Check out the DOS Geek channel, where our very own Ryan reviews awesome tech, discusses ways to keep your privacy intact online, and geeks out on all things open source and Linux. In his latest episode, he talks about DuckDuckGo's awesome new subscription service, Privacy Pro. Go check it out. Woohoo! Everyone head to tuxdigital.com and subscribe to all our great shows. And don't forget to leave a rating on your favorite app so others can discover the power of open source and keep those penguins marching in the full Monty of Linux and open source awesome sauce.
Everybody, have a great week. And remember that the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
Unless you're taking that journey in 1920 by 1080, in which
then it's going to be a little bit annoying.
It'll be a little blurry and crappy for you.
And zoomed in a little bit too much.
Crap monitors.
And you won't have as good. You might have some good, like some decent battery life, but I mean,
well, not really. You still don't get the good battery. It's just better than the 2K.
It's better than
still crap.
Sure.
That's there. So enjoy it.
Yeah, enjoy. And also, I hope you enjoyed this show, this episode.
Yeah.
Let us know what you think. DestinationLinux.net/comments.
We're a little salty on the 1920 thing, aren't we?
A little bit.
Yeah, I was defensive. You said they attacked you, so I was defensive. You know.
Well, I mean, it wasn't like vicious attacking.
Back.
It wasn't a vicious attack or anything like that.
Yeah,
there was. Like
I was ready to go to war.
There was one or two. Most people were super nice. The vast majority of the comments were super nice. They gave their opinion, and that's totally fine. There was occasional,
not okay for you to give
occasional viciousness.
My opinion.
I mean. Your opinion is bad, and therefore that's not okay for you to give your.
That's rude, Michael. I'm no longer defending you. You know what? Attack Michael at will, people. I will not get in your way.
I regret nothing.
Let the mobs swarm.
I regret nothing. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We'll see you next week.